Okay, good morning to the Close It community, February 11th. So super happy to be part of this today. I continue to learn from each of these sessions, and both Luther Jackson and Phil Jordan have just done a great job with their hub and getting great participation. I met Luther last year at the Close It Summit face-to-face. And Luther, it's at NovaWorks, and he'll tell you a little bit about himself, his work, and this hub. So thank you so much for pulling this together today, Luther.
Thanks so much, Jemay, and hello, Close It community. Great to have you with us. I'm Luther Jackson from NovaWorks. We're a workforce development board in Silicon Valley. And on behalf of my hub co-leader, Phil Jordan from BW Research, I'm pleased to welcome you to this inspirational presentation. Our hub is designing workforce interventions that ultimately lead to greater workforce mobility, and as we like to say, help get diverse talent on the field in order to boost regional economies. So our focus is one of talent, not charity. Now, there's certainly a lot of folks out there talking about things like career mobility, equity, social justice, particularly since the summer. And historically, there's been a lot of money reports and conferences devoted to these topics. I just found the report from 2010 in Silicon Valley that talks about some of our problems here. And it says, the report mentions as a problem the persistence of poverty and low rates of high school graduation and post-secondary training opportunities for many residents, both for children and existing low-wage workers. But despite all that, massive gaps remain in education and workforce persistence, completion, and achievement. So what gives? Well, I'm going to suggest a two-word problem statement. Low expectations. Low expectations as in, come on, those people can't do calculus. Let's give them something easier. Or engineering is too complicated for those people. It's too ambitious. Those low expectations then get institutionalized and codified. So today we ask a big question. What would our worlds look like with high expectations? We're delighted to have with us leaders from City University of New York and Georgia State University to show us what's possible. And now I'd like to introduce Phil Jordan, who will get us started. Take it away, Phil.
Great, thank you so much, Luther. We are so thrilled to be joined today by two dynamic leaders in higher education. Dr. Allison Calhoun-Brown, who's the Vice President for Student Engagement and Programs at Georgia State University, and Christine Barnyart, the University Executive Director of CUNY ASAP program at the City of New York University. We so appreciate your time and thank you for being here with us. I also just want to take a moment to recognize one of our guests today in the audience, Keith Morrison, who helped us organize today's presentation. Thank you for all your help in pulling this together. Look forward to maybe hearing from you in the Q&A. As Luther stated, low expectations are often codified, and as a result, many come to believe that the status quo is all that is possible. I recall back to the Close It conference a year ago when Angela Jackson spoke as a keynote, and she asked the audience to raise their hand if they agreed with the statement that all people can learn. And everyone in the audience raised their hand. Yet so often when we look across our programs and we see restrictions and lack of resources and other types of constraints, we start to wonder whether the systems that we work in really believe that that's possible. And as Luther said, sometimes the easiest pathway for folks is just to lower those expectations, and that's all that's possible. Our speakers today really prove otherwise. So drawing on their experiences from Georgia and New York, they can show us that if it can work in Atlanta and beyond, and if it can work in the Bronx and all across New York City, it can work anywhere. Each speaker is going to talk about how their organizations have eliminated achievement gaps among populations that many have sadly given up on. We're grateful for their expertise and their passion. And we're so pleased, as I said, to have you here today to show us what's possible. After some brief presentations, we'll have a Q&A period, so you'll be able to enter your questions into the chat, into the Q&A function, and I'll moderate those. But first, I'd like to introduce Christine. I met Christine and the City University of New York ASAP program about a year ago, just before COVID-19 shut everything down. In fact, it was my last trip, train coming back from New York City, seeing all of the travel restrictions coming into place, where I had the pleasure of learning a lot about this program as an evaluator, and was pleased to see that the program actually won the Innovations in American Government Award from the Ash Center at Harvard University. So a great program. Christine, we're so happy and thankful and grateful to you for joining. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil and Luther. Thank you so much, Close It community. I'm happy to join you. I'm going to attempt now to share my screen with you. Let's see. Let me make sure I am. Can you all see my screen, or do you see a Zoom screen?
It looks great.
Oh, good. You see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. For some reason, I don't see my screen, so I'm going to try this again. All right. All right. Do you see my screen now? Sorry.
Yeah, we see your whole PowerPoint.
Oh, I see. Okay. I'm so sorry. I should have flagged this prior to the start here. Let's see if I can try this again. Technical difficulties. There we are. Okay. Thank you for your patience. And thank you again, Luther and Phil, for those framing remarks. I'm really, really excited to join you all and speak a little bit about ASAP's history, our expansion and scale across CUNY, our national replication efforts, but mostly just kind of echoing the framing remarks. CUNY ASAP truly is built on the premise that we understand that the nature of our students is one wherein when you remove all the known barriers, all the systematic and unnecessary complexities, all of the ways in which we really do put unsubstantiated challenges in front of our students. Nonetheless, they can persist, but when you remove those barriers in a very comprehensive, targeted, and intentional way, there really is such limitless potential in terms of what can be achieved, especially in a very complicated institution like the City University of New York. So the City University of New York, just for a little context, is our nation's largest public urban university system. We have a current enrollment of over 500,000 students. We serve all levels of education from HSC GED to PhD. It's composed of 24 institutions across all 5 boroughs, 7 community colleges, 11 baccalaureate colleges, 6 graduate and honors, professional school. What's most interesting, I think, about CUNY as a university system is that it is so intricately interwoven with our city and state agencies. Of course, we are funded primarily through the City of New York. We have a very, very interconnected relationship with the priorities of our mayor. And we, of course, have a very kind of intricate relationship with our public DOE system. So that then really does kind of lend itself to the way in which we're situated structurally. Often when the City of New York has large, complex problems, they turn to the City University of New York and leadership to really kind of investigate how we can co-mine solutions. The origin of CUNY ASAP is one that is quite unique. The then Chancellor of CUNY and the then Mayor of New York City, Mayor Bloomberg, they really wanted to understand how to address social and economic mobility from the standpoint of the mayor's initiative through his Center of Economic Opportunity. We understood that our city's community college completion rates were dismally low. There were 14% 3-year graduation completion rates, and we knew we could do better. We knew our students were capable of so much more, and we knew that the nature of the way in which our system and our mechanism of welcoming students into our colleges were so overly complicated, and not only complicated to navigate, but also just the resources that students were able to then have to navigate and access were unnecessarily, in the shadows in terms of accessibility. So I would say that I just wanted to frame how we are kind of organized, because it really does lend itself to a different kind of paradigm in the way in which usually large scale program initiatives are kind of structured, especially in a system like CUNY. So I'm housed under the Office of Academic Affairs. And then we work very much as a consortium with our 9 implementing ASAP partner colleges. ASAP is essentially a direct implementation embedded within each of our 9 partner college communities. We have a dedicated staff who runs the program day to day, but our administrative offices really do provide a different level of program administration of program resources, and a very, very robust evaluation and data management agenda. So I can definitely elaborate on this, but I wanted to first spend most of our time talking a little bit about the model. Again, the model is very much structured in a way where there's a comprehensive and integrated set of resources and services that basically work to eliminate all of the known barriers to momentum. So I would say that the premise of ASAP, when it was conceptualized, was one wherein we understood all of the evidence-based practices that were most effective to removing all barriers to full-time enrollment, but there never was a full-scale effort to really house those in a comprehensive and holistic manner. So that it really is what ASAP represents. It's a holistic, comprehensive model that addresses academic momentum, that achieves integration and belonging, and that provides timely and relevant supports to students. Now, we really do accomplish this through one primary delivery mechanism, and that is our high-touch academic advisement. We have modest caseloads of 1 to 150 students, and we really ensure that the nature of that relationship being intrusive, proactive, so individualized that ensures that students are really able to gain the support and access to resources and navigational, a navigational perspective, so that they are driving their own academic journey, but they have someone who really has their back. So we'll talk a little bit more about advisement, but I wanted to just call your attention to the other ways in which we achieve academic momentum. And that is really ensuring that students with their very busy lives and other responsibilities have the access to full-time consolidated course schedules, so they can take their classes in morning blocks, in afternoon blocks, and evening or weekend blocks if that's necessary. That all, the scheduling piece and the logistical piece is certainly a mechanism to achieve academic momentum. We cover winter and summer intersession course taking to ensure they're utilizing that full academic year. And we're removing all key financial barriers. We cover any gap that they have between their tuition and fees and their financial aid received. We provide textbook assistance, and we provide them transportation support in the form of an unlimited Metro card, wherein they can use the Metro for all of their needs and without out of pocket. We also really like to emphasize this notion of integration and belonging. Again, as I had mentioned, when students move from their high school to their college careers, there often is kind of a sink or swim mentality, especially in a university system that's so large as the City University of New York. We bring our cohorts in early. We ensure that our ASAP students get the kind of hands-on early engagement that they require. So they're oriented to the resources that they have, they're oriented to the technology that they'll need to navigate. They're oriented to, how the program and the way in which they'll engage with their academic advisor are the expectations to that engagement. So that early engagement is pretty critical. We offer first-year blocked courses so that we ensure that our students are having that experience with their fellow ASAP students and having courses together, usually our general education courses, where we can achieve that in that first year. A number of different leadership opportunities are offered to our students. We have a peer mentor program. We have a student ambassador program that supports our recruitment efforts. So lots of opportunities for students to further develop a sense of integration and belonging, both within the program and within their college community. And then there's the provision of timely and relevant supports. Timely and relevant supports beyond our academic advisement includes program dedicated tutoring, embedded tutoring that students are able to access without stigma. So we definitely encourage students to participate in these kinds of study groups, structured tutoring, wherein it really is encouraged even when students aren't necessarily academically struggling. We have personalized career development supports. And we of course have, basic kind of navigational support in terms of connection to additional campus-based resources and community-based resources that are available. So all of this is offered as a full integrated package of supports and services to our students. And you'll notice at the top, there is an evaluation and data use for program management thread. So I really can't emphasize this enough. When we first began a relationship with the city, we really did have to demonstrate outcomes early. And we had to create structure wherein this program was launched with our then 6 community colleges, and there had to be kind of a cohesive administration structure wherein there are certain expectations for program engagement and academic performance that we were able to monitor right up front. So we really did create a very robust evaluation agenda. And what underpins that is a very nimble data management tool, a homegrown database, wherein it is accessible to all staff, whether you are an academic advisor or a program director or our own administrative staff. It's a business intelligence tool, and it's also a mechanism to really monitor student progress at a very granular level. So I can speak a little bit about that. But this is our model as we kind of academify it, but our model and our promise to our students is a little bit more straightforward and simple. This is kind of our logo that we have plastered all over the city of New York on subway trains and on all sorts of marketing efforts, because our office does help support the recruitment of our students year to year. But our message is simple. We have their back, we have their books and their Metro cards. Sometimes we have to use that carrot of the financial resources to get students interested. We're a post-matriculation program, which means that we really do have to ensure our students know about the program, and they know that they have to first apply to and be accepted to one of our colleges that offer the program. And after they are accepted, we then engage them in more active program recruitment. In terms of program eligibility, this is very broad. We basically have a spot at our current scale for quite a large proportion of CUNY students, incoming first-time freshmen in particular. We require that our students be eligible for New York City resident tuition at the community colleges or state tuition at all of our other senior colleges or comprehensive colleges that offer the program. We ask them, of course, to commit to full-time study. And we ask them to file for financial aid every year. So both FAFSA and our New York City tuition assistance program. Just a little note on the demographic of our student, wherein 85% of our students are in receipt of Pell or TAP or tuition assistance from the state of New York. So that demonstrates kind of the demographic financial need profile of our students. We also do accept continuing or transfer students or students that have no more than 15 college credits at the point of application. So just a note, this is a quite unusual history. Again, we began in 2007. We had a very, very integrated relationship with the City of New York through the Mayor's Office, Center on Economic Opportunity. We were kind of an all-in at the time, but we started with a modest cohort of 1,100 students. Again, the 3-year completion rate at that time was 14%. And again, we knew we could do so much better. So we really did demonstrate outcomes early and quickly. And you can see by the trajectory through demonstrating those outcomes, the City University was able to then garner baseline support by the city by fall of 2011. That means that the allocation to support roughly 1,200 students per academic year was a permanent allocation to the City University of New York. So that provided some stability to continue to run the program. But that surely was just a fraction of the eligible population that could benefit from the program. So I think our office always had a very clear prioritization in terms of continuing to build the evidence base, continuing to prove how 3-year graduation rate increases had broader systemic implications, And so that's really where you see things quite abruptly take off around the, you can see kind of in the transition by 2015, 2016, that's exactly the time that the results of our random assignment study was released by our partners MDRC. That validated what we saw already. That validated what we were through our quasi-experimental research and evaluation, wherein 53.4% of our students were graduating within 3 years versus 24.6% of our matched comparison group students. We knew this to be true from our internal evaluation work, but it was just validated and really kind of amplified in terms of the potential impact by MDRC's release of their study in 2015. So at 2015, that's really when the city, even through a mayoral transition, moving from Mayor Bloomberg to Mayor Bill de Blasio, he was scouring, what works, and very early in his administration acknowledged that ASAP was absolutely a sure thing. So he doubled down, and that's exactly when we really see more exponential growth, wherein we were basically on the fast track to expansion. So that's really moving from 8,000 students per academic year to our current scale, which is 25,000 students per academic year. So that is the scale at which we are now baseline to serve. So with that doubling, across over time, our allocation from the city also increased. So we are, again, kind of at a very financially stable, place right now, even despite our, fiscal climate in this moment. Our allocation from the city remains stable from last fiscal year to this current fiscal year, and 25,000 students is where we remain service. I think our continual commitment to demonstrating the ways in which the program both maintains our 3-year graduation commitment, and then our rigorous commitment to the way in which we look at the data, ensure that we're really staying true to the ways in which we want to narrow that equity gap in terms of how we're looking at the subgroup disaggregated data. If you see this 3-year graduation rate breakdown by subgroup, you can see that ASAP's impact on graduation rates is found for all subgroups. So within all the subgroups, ASAP students are very close to or above that 50% graduation rate. You can see there's some differential effects. You can particularly see that ASAP appears to reduce the gap between Black and white males and Hispanic and white males. So I think that is, again, our constant commitment to assessing the impact of the program, ensuring that we are, disaggregating and looking at the data in ways where we are really looking to build more kind of proactive and customized programming for our students, particularly students who can see there's more work to do in terms of narrowing that gap. I had mentioned MDRC's RCT that validated our doubling effect. I'd also just like to point that we did go through more rigorous cost effectiveness and benefit studies. They're a little dated, but still very validating in terms of the savings ASAP realizes, which is $6,500 per graduate versus the comparison group. Overall, the net benefits for 1,000 enrolled ASAP students equals about $46.5 million, or $1 million higher than for 1,000 comparison group students. So I think that that's an area we would like to refresh our data given our current scale, because I think we'll find those savings and those benefits to be even more pronounced. But what's actually even more pronounced is our current university-wide completion rates. Right now at our current scale of serving 25,000 students per academic year, ASAP students comprise roughly a third or 32% of the total associate student full-time enrollment across the university. And as we continue to grow and maintain this scale, we project that the overall system rate of our 3-year associate degree will go up from 18% for our freshman cohort who entered in 2013. We're going to boost that up to 36% by 2022 based on our current expansion and scale. So it's really exciting to see that the program maintains our performance and therefore has a pronounced effect on our overall system-wide completion rates. Just a quick mention, we have adapted the model to the baccalaureate degree setting where we've launched it at 2 senior colleges. So looking to double our 4-year completion rates. We've been able to achieve that with our first cohort of students who entered in 2015, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, their first cohort of ACE students, so that's Accelerate, Complete, and Engage, realized a 58.4 four-year graduation versus it's almost 16 percentage points higher for a matched comparison group of students. So we continue to build the evidence base for ACE. We launched a random assignment study in the fall of 2018, and we've been serving close to 2,000 students. We've been privately funding that cohort to my cohort, but the plan is similar to ASAP, is to build our evidence base and secure more stable state-based support for the program. And in our continual pursuit to build our evidence base, we've entered the National Replication Forum, wherein we wanted to provide technical assistance to institutions who were interested in replicating the model with a high level of fidelity. So we've been doing that in modest scale. We formed a National Replication Collaborative where we've actively partnered with institutions in Ohio, California, Tennessee, and now West Virginia. An interesting feature in West Virginia is that we're really going to be looking at the wage and the labor market data. In addition to the graduation data, there's an RCT launching for their first implementation cohort next fall that's going to really look at the employment implications for this subgroup of students who are going to be graduating at a much more timely rate. So I wanted to end here, and I really am excited to engage with you all if you have any questions, and I'm turning it back over to Philip. Thank you.
Christine, thank you so much. I can tell you that, as I was there evaluating the program and learning about it, one of my favorite stories was that I got in a taxi cab to go up to Bronx Community College. And the guy just was making small talk with me and was asking me, what I was doing down there. And I sort of very loosely described this program. And he said, "Oh, you mean ASAP?" He said, my wife did ASAP. It's the only reason that she made it through college, and she was off getting a four-year degree and preparing to go to law school. So talk about fortuitous, right? To have your evaluator have that conversation, but really just incredible. And the human element of meeting the students and the staff, it's really, really wonderful. And so I hope that those of you who are really excited about the idea of setting those high expectations and finding ways of meeting them will engage with Christine and CUNY and see what they're doing there. I think we'll, just in the interest of time, I'm going to very briefly introduce Dr. Allison Calhoun Brown, so from Georgia State. So Allison and I spoke earlier this week, and I let her know that I had spoken to one of the professors at Georgia State about the persistence programs, because you really can't do any literature review on successful programs for persistence and growth and achievement gap elimination without coming across Georgia State. But the real story was that I was at a very large extended Thanksgiving Day dinner, but back when we used to be able to do those things. And my brother-in-law's dad, we were just having a chat, and I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm an adjunct professor at Georgia State University." And I reacted, right, with this excitement. And he said, "I think that's the most excitement I've ever gotten from telling somebody that I'm an adjunct professor at Georgia State University." But we had a great conversation about some of the things that were happening from his perspective as a professor, and the types of things that he was involved with, and all the professors are involved with, really, to make sure that we're keeping and maintaining and setting those high expectations. So with that, I will turn it over to Allison, and thanks again for being here with us.
Well, good day, everybody. Phil, Luther, thank you so much for inviting me to participate with the Close It community today. Thanks to Christine as well. It's the first time that I've heard a full presentation on the CUNY ASAP program, and I could not be more excited to hear about the results. It's also exciting to hear that there are many parallels between that program and some of the things that we're doing at Georgia State. I have also prepared a bit of some slides to give you an overview. So let me see if I can successfully share my screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, very good then. So the challenge really that faces all of higher education is a very big challenge, right? The challenge in front of us, this is what this slide shows here, that from 1970, up into the 2000s, for students who are in the upper income quartile or even in the third income quartile, graduation rates have doubled. But in the lower income quartiles, there's not been a lot of progress. In fact, between 1970 and 2005 for the bottom income quartile, the graduation rate really only went up by about 2 or 3 percentage points there. So there's a really big challenge in increasing outcomes for students who have historically been underserved by higher education. Georgia State is actually, as an institution, centrally involved really in this dynamic. At Georgia State is a public urban research institution. There are 36,000 students in Atlanta. It's a research university with a community college because 18,000 students of the 50,000 in the student population come from Perimeter College, a two-year school that Georgia State was consolidated with in 2016. 70% of the students at Georgia State are from underrepresented minorities. That number is up considerably from 2010, where it was 54%. And nearly 2/3 of the student population are low income or Pell eligible. In 2010, that number was 40%. So even in the last decade, the numbers of at-risk students at Georgia State has increased. And some people might say, well, that is not really a recipe. More underrepresented students, more low-income students. Our first-generation population has also gone up significantly. Some people would say that, hey, that would be a really hard population to produce student success. But in 2010, instead, Georgia State doubled down on our objective to be a national model for undergraduate education, demonstrating that students from all backgrounds can achieve academic and career success at high rates. That was going to be a real challenge, but the way that we engaged it was to start to ask, are we the problem? It's sometimes easy to point the finger at K through 12 education or at state appropriations, which, interestingly, during this time also went down by more than $40 million. There are lots of reasons, sometimes external to the university, that we might come up with for why we don't have the success rates that we want. And at this time, we really didn't have the success rates that we wanted. At the four-year school, the average graduation rate was about 30%, and we had achievement gaps for African-American students where their numbers were 5% lower than that, and for Hispanic students, even 5% lower than the African-American students. So we started a different approach where we would collect data, pilot interventions, assess and revise what was happening, and then figure a way to scale it up for maximum impact. This may not seem really revolutionary, but it did revolutionize the way that we were doing things at Georgia State, looking at retention, progression, and graduation, both in the aggregate and for at-risk populations. Not, resisting the fact that we had at-risk populations, but trying to figure out how can we create an environment where these at-risk populations can succeed. It's not a program at Georgia State. A lot of schools have programs where they're trying to get their Pell eligible students to succeed, but Georgia State has nearly 30,000 Pell eligible students. So a program is not going to get it. We needed to change our approach. So, we started digging into the data and we found some really interesting challenges. So for example, in 2015, just to give you a couple of examples that we can walk through, we found that almost 20% of the freshmen who confirmed that they were coming to Georgia State, who were qualified to attend a research university, did not enroll. And when we started to dig down into what could be going on, we found that there were many hidden obstacles to enrollment. These are some of the same barriers that Christine was just talking about, unnecessary complexities that actually hurt students' abilities to persist. And so we found, for example, our students weren't filling out or successfully the federal financial aid application. Many of those students, because they're low income and often don't have sort of the stereotypical family situations, perhaps they're being raised by their grandmother, subject to verification request. The state of Georgia has all kinds of immunization rules that are good for public health. And if you're a middle income family, really easy to go to your family doctor and get that confirmation of your immunization. But if you're a low income student, often, if your public health has been delivered by clinics, this can be a really big hurdle to get over. So we found lots of hidden obstacles to enrollment that were disproportionately disadvantaging our low income students. And so one of the things that we did, we became one of the first schools in the country, in fact, one of the first 4 schools in the country, to use an AI enhanced chatbot in the summertime that students could access 24 hours a day. In fact, we found that the most common time that students would access the chatbot was after midnight, and they could get questions answered by asking our school mascot, Pounce. And here's on the slide is a communication around filling out FAFSA if you have divorced parents, the kinds of questions that sometimes students would be hesitant to ask. They felt empowered to ask the chatbot, and the chatbot would give them a response. And what we saw in 3 years was a significant drop in summer melt. And that translated to 360 more students coming to the university, enrolling successfully, and starting their college program. Another really good example is that when we looked at the data, we found that we had a retention rate for our most academically at risk students year over year of only 50%. Of course, that's terrible. Students come with their hopes and their dreams, and we were only returning on those hopes and dreams after 1 year at a 50% rate. So we changed how we admitted those students. We admit them in the summertime to something we call the Summer Success Academy, and we wrap around all kinds of academic supports, financial literacy training, career development, professional development training. And we told them, hey, welcome to Georgia State as long as you come in the summertime, where we can really support them more fully. And the retention rate went literally year over year from 50% to 87%. We're able to retain many more students just by changing the way that we did things. And for the first couple of cohorts, the graduation rate for that group has been higher than the 1 year retention rate was historically. So it really stresses that changing the way that we do things as an institution or as an organization can produce dramatically different outcomes, even for the same population of students. The last example that I'll point to is the fact that, Georgia State was losing more than 5,000 students every year to drop out, stop out. And most of these students, to tell you the truth, didn't get going again. And so, we would find out that they had stopped out long after we should have. So we engaged in a really big project of predictive analytics, partnering with a company called Education Advisory Board, where we looked at 10 years of Georgia State data, more than 2.5 million grades, to come up with 800 analytic-based alerts that would indicate that students were going off path. We call it the GPS, just like a GPS, the global positioning system, to try to keep our students on path. And now every student is tracked daily for these markers. the registration and tracking is based on academic maps. We, monitor to make sure that the students are taking the classes that they should take and that they're earning the requisite grades that they need to be successful. And if they don't, someone reaches out. And, just looking at this slide, you can get a sense of the difference that it makes. Look at the middle of the slide there. If you get an A or a B in political science in your first political science class and go on to major in political science, you graduate from Georgia State at a really great rate. If you get a C, that rate plummets down to about 25%. Historically, we had done nothing to support those students who might have earned that C. Now somebody reaches out and gets them back on track. And this really is a combination of high tech and high touch, because the tech gives us the insight that we need to know what's going on with our students. But we also have scaled up our academic advisors so that they can reach out to the students with that information. And we've seen a huge return on investment for the students from this kind of intervention. Literally, the savings for the class of 2019 in tuition and fees compared to the class of 2012 was more than $18 million. Other impacts that I'd like to share really quickly is that the graduation rate at Georgia State has gone up. The 6-year rate has gone up 10 points in the last 10 years, the 5-year rate up 11 points, the 4-year rate up 14 points. And since consolidation in 2016 with the 2-year institution Perimeter College, where we've been able to implement many of these same programs, the graduation rate is up 16 points post-consolidation. Also, the percentage increase in the total number of degrees at Georgia State up 73%. And as encouraging, the rates for African Americans, for low-income Pell eligible students, and for Hispanic students outpace the rate for the student body overall. And so this is something that we're really excited about, because it does demonstrate, if we change the way that we can do things, if we continue to hold expectations, but to provide the requisite support and make the necessary adjustments, we can absolutely succeed with the students that we have and produce some better outcomes. So thank you very much for opportunity to present on that. I'm sure I'm happy to answer any questions. Gonna stop sharing now.
Thank you so much. Thanks for those presentations, really just terrific. And I mean, even as many times as I see the data, it's just so very exciting and inspirational to see it again. So, I really appreciate both of you coming on here to show us what's possible and to share with us some of the successes. I did want to just note, because we got a few questions in the chat about this, but as with the other presentations in the Close It conference, this has been recorded and is continuing to be recorded, and so it will be posted in the same way in the conference website, and that is where we get a lot of the traffic on these anyways. People have conflicts wherever they come in and view it, but certainly all the information will be available that was presented today. I did want to maybe just sort of start us off with a question for both of you, really. Maybe we'll start with Christine. I'm sort of fascinated when we look at the numbers and we see the ROI analyses and the other successes that you've had. But at the same time, it's not like this is a small number, right, in terms of what it costs to run a program that provides all of those support services. And Georgia State has implemented all of these new measures that obviously cost money. How did you build sort of a coalition of supporters within the mayor's office, or maybe Allison within the governor's office, or throughout the university system, to convince folks to make this something that is funded at a level that makes sense and can actually work, and B, is something that is seen as not discretionary or a nice to have, but actually as a gotta have? So maybe Christine, I'll start with you, and then Allison, if you have any thoughts on that. And
Sure.
others, if you have questions, please use the chat function. I am looking at it, and I saw one come in, and so we'll get to that just after this.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Phil. And I think, the entire underlying premise of ASAP was the mayor's office understanding and really adopting a stance that, with completion comes increased lifetime earnings, increased tax revenues, savings to public assistance, criminal justice, public health. I think it was underscored without kind of a short-term hunger. It was more of a long-term vision of understanding how efficiencies achieved through quicker time to degree. Now, there was a question about the effectiveness. We didn't undergo the actual cost-benefit, cost-effectiveness analysis until even beyond the city's baseline investment in the program. So there was this core belief and understanding about the returns and in terms of kind of the implications to the workforce, and again, lifetime earnings and tax revenue. I think that is really the kind of core motivator. But I think the measure of effectiveness is really the completion, time to completion towards degree. That's really kind of the way in which Dr. Henry Levin approached the cost effectiveness study. But again, I think that the city always understood very deeply that completion really was a social and economic benefit to the city more broadly. So we didn't have to kind of go through an exercise of convincing the city of that. That was the premise of the way in which the city then approached the City University of New York to then kind of address the completion rate issue. And it was not until, the university was able to essentially demonstrate in a modest scale the implications of accelerating completion. And it really was an experiment, and it was an experiment to even scale it across CUNY to 25,000 students. There were so many modifications we had to make in terms of ensuring the fidelity of the model. We had to look at the way in which the academic advisors were able to effectively serve so many more students. We had to build a staffing structure that was sustainable. There were ways in which we had to kind of reconfigure the way in which we continue to build connectedness in a cohort community base, maintaining all those key elements of the program. So I would say that the experiment was one where we entered with a little bit of blind faith in the holisticness of the model. And again, we demonstrated and monitored the effectiveness, and we continue to receive the support of the city through that commitment of demonstrating that.
Great, thank you. Allison, anything to add from your perspective in terms of Georgia and how you sort of were able to convince folks at the university and state government that this was something that sort of had to be done and was worth investing in?
Yeah, I would underscore, and it definitely relates to what Christina's just shared, the importance of data, right? And results, obviously. But, here in the university is full of academics. Almost every academic has been taught to respect some kind of rule of evidence. It's different for scientists, perhaps, than for those in the humanities, but there are always standards for rules of evidence. And so being able to share the data really depersonalizes sometimes the problem. It allows people to really engage in a very objective way in problem solving and in creative problem solving to produce some better outcomes. And then really it's on some level, it's the scientific process, where you have a problem, you assess, evaluate, or you have a hypothesis, you assess and evaluate, and then you make adjustments based on what you see in order to produce some better outcomes. And so that dynamic, I think, in a university environment works particularly well. And then being able to share results with politicians and other stakeholders, both in the university system environment, but also with the Georgia legislature, also works very well because there is accountability for the investment that they are making.
And in terms of the initial sort of pilots that gave you that prove it model that you could use to build the data, was that something that came from internal university resources? Did you have outside philanthropy, or was there special funding to get it kicked off?
Yeah, I mean, much of this was in university resources, at least to begin. There are some things that we can do for relatively low cost. And, so for example, the Success Academy program, when we started it, it really was just an enrollment model, right? Students had, there was no special scholarship. Students were able to enroll the way they always enrolled, but because our enrollments were so much smaller in the summers, down by a third to a half sometimes in the summer, we have a lot of 12-month faculty, 12-month employees, not necessarily faculty, but 12-month employees who could support the program because they had extra capacity in the summer. Since then we have sought some philanthropic gifts and we have some support, but still it's a very low cost way to make adjustments. And so we were able to do some of those things. And then as we made some momentum, for example, investing in academic advisors, for instance, that does cost money, but we were able to make the case for those resources because we were making progress.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Christine, anything to add on that front?
So I think that the expectation from the city was, as you had noted, to demonstrate outcomes early in real time, because the year-to-year process of renewing the allocation really demanded that. So the first hire that our founding executive director made was a data and evaluation coordinator. That was just kind of a demonstration of, really having dedicated staff to that role of building our research and evaluation agenda was absolutely baked in from the beginning. And then it's also reflective in the way in which our models are staffed locally at our partner colleges, where we have one staff who is fully dedicated to the rigorous monitoring of our program data, and then are able to kind of synthesize and analyze that and share across the program to all of the program staff. For their particular context setting. But we did privately fund for our RCTs. That was something that we wanted to, kind of double down on our evidence base, and through investment of philanthropic funds, have been able to kind of push that through. So we have private funding for RCTs, both for ASAP historically and now for our ACE model.
Great. So just a couple of quick questions. Maybe these are both targeted to Allison, but one is, interesting finding about getting a C or lower in an introductory course. And would that apply across most or all introductory courses? The illustrative courses seem remarkably diverse, music theory to chemistry. And then also another note, and this is specifically for Allison, question, do you want to talk about the Panther retention grants at Georgia State University to help students stay in school who would drop out for financial reasons? And then maybe Christine, you could follow that with some of the things that are happening in terms of tuition gap assistance and other financial supports at CUNY.
Yeah, so talking real quickly about the introductory courses, those were just meant to be illustrative across a broad range. But we do find that there's a lot of evidence for, obviously, if you don't do well in that first course, if there's not support or some kind of diagnosis for why you didn't do well in the first course, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to expect that the second and third course may be more challenging. And so we actually monitor that very carefully. Even where faculty have gone in sometimes and said, well, you have to have a C to take the next class. We'd never gone back and actually evaluated with data about whether or not a C would get it. And we found in our accounting classes, for instance, that a C in the first accounting class was not going to really set a student up for really great grades in the second accounting class. And so we were able to work with the faculty who are still completely in charge of the curriculum, but to use the data to make those adjustments. I would love to talk about the Panther Retention Grant, because certainly there is a financial component to student success that is very important. And we were finding that we were dropping thousands of students for non-payment. And when we really looked at the data, the students that we were most likely to drop for non-payment were seniors who had either run out of aid, or we have a state-sponsored scholarship that basically only pays for 127 of the 120 hours that you need to graduate. And so students, attempted hours even, so students would run out of money. And so using our Panther, something we called the Panther Retention Grant, we were able to make small grants averaging less than $900 to these students who were most at risk and closest to graduation in order to keep them in school and moving forward in a way that they could graduate. And we've done all kinds of assessments, you know, on the Panther Retention Grant program as well. And we have found that program really pays for itself many times over, because, you know, you had students who had invested a lot of money, sometimes out of pocket, sometimes, you know, through state aid or federal aid, but they had a small shortfall and they were being kicked out of school for the small shortfall. When we give them the money, they stay in school, they have the small shortfall covered, and Georgia State receives all the, you know, all the revenue in terms of tuition and fees for the student to stay in class. So it's a win for everyone. It's a creative way to really think about aid differently. And, you know, that's what I think part of this session is really about, thinking about what we can do differently to produce some better outcomes by providing the adequate supports.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. I think that, you know, understanding the out-of-pocket financial barriers of our students, wherein, you know, the cost of a textbook sometimes means, you know, the cost of a month's groceries. I mean, these are very real challenges our students are facing, and we wanted to eliminate all those financial barriers through comprehensive out-of-pocket supports. So we cover the textbooks, we cover the transportation out-of-pockets, which can be quite costly in New York, despite it being a public transport system. But the tuition and gap fee waiver, we ensure that our students have the support they need to first file their federal aid and their tuition assistance program, a message that Allison touched on in terms of just the navigational orientation of wading through that process, you know, moving through verification, which in and of itself is a dysfunctional system with landmines of barriers that, I mean, even your most kind of, you know, seasoned adult, it's very difficult to sometimes wade through those. So just understanding the ways in which to communicate the value of what students are essentially entitled to through federal and state aid, and then ensuring that any gap, even when they have to drop down to part-time, even when they're at the end of the road and their actual aid is dwindling, we make sure we cover that gap to get them over the finish line.
Great. Well, we are just about at the end of our time. I did want to just take a second to thank you both again for providing this incredible information. This is part of an ongoing process that we're working on to try to really encourage organizations to start thinking in these ways of what's possible and come up with that type of disruptive success formula that you both talked quite a bit about. I would just note that John Boudreau put a very interesting and thought-provoking article in the chat that perhaps we could take a look at as we go forward and think of our work. So I'd encourage people to check that out before you log off. And I'll turn it over to Luther just for some final remarks and to close us out. But for my part, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
This is great. So I would just say high expectations. What a breath of fresh air. Thanks so much to Allison and Christine. You got my day off to a great start. And now that we are so inspired, we will continue on or about February 25th with our next Hub 2 design session. So take a look for that. We're going to be starting with our interventions to various workforce challenges, and we'll certainly use the inspiration we got today and these great ideas for moving forward. So thanks to both of you, and thanks to everyone who participated. It was a great session.
Yeah, it really was. Thank you all.